Hey guys, tonight we trudged through a half-frozen stone cottage. Your breath puffing like stray candle smoke as you tiptoe across icy flagstones, and you probably won't survive this without learning how medieval peasants kept their toes from turning into popsicles. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so I know where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you slide onto a low wooden bench, one that looks unremarkable except for its bulging straw seams. That innocent bench is actually a masterstroke of peasant engineering and everyday thermal battery. In an era when even your livestock had cozier quarters than you, throwing a hollow bench with loose straw turned simple seating into a surprisingly toasty refuge. Mainstream sources tell us that medieval homes rarely had insulation beyond animal hides and mud plaster, so villagers relied on the hearth as their primary and woefully inefficient heat source. Historians still argue whether these benches sprang up first as casual seating or as dedicated warming stations, but either way, they quickly became indispensable. You settle in and feel the prickly straw needles poking through your woolen breeches, releasing a faint, earthy aroma that reminds you of last autumn's harvest. Here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants mixed in dried pine, needles, or even bits of animal hair, anything to boost both insulation and fragrance. It's almost like they were the world's earliest home fragrance connoisseurs, if your idea of fragrance is barnyard sandalwood. Yet that scratchy warmth is exactly what you need, because a frazzled peasant in shift and tunic has about the same odds of staying warm as you would wearing only flip-flops in a snowstorm. Night after night, straw bench origins trace back to the harvest season, when villagers had an abundance of leftover stalks. Instead of burning every scrap, they repurposed their waste into these tubular seats. Someone likely sat on a pile of bare straw near the hearth one particularly freezing evening and thought, "Hey, this feels remarkably toastier than that cold stone floor," and the rest, along with a few dozen burnished ale mugs, became history. As you lean back, you feel the straw compressing just enough to cradle your legs. In contrast to a hard plank bench, this cushioned seat absorbs and holds residual heat, much like how modern sleeping bags trap air pockets for warmth. And while today you'd reach for a heated blanket or a space heater, these straw benches did the job with zero electricity, though plenty of manual labor during autumn. Remember that this was long before central heating, when every puff of warmth was hard-won. A gentle joke drifts to mind. You might think these straw benches are just a rustic Instagram aesthetic for peasants. But back then, it was less vintage farmhouse and more do or die. Yet despite the discomfort of the straw poking through layers of wool and linen, it was infinitely preferable to crawling under a frozen blanket that smelled faintly of last month's turnip. Between bench sessions, families would fire up their peat-burning hearths, more on that next time, while the straw retained heat for hours after the embers died. Scholars still debate how peasant households balanced the smoky haze of indoor fires with the need for breathable air. But one thing's clear: straw benches sat cheek by jowl with hearth smoke, willingly absorbing every last ember's warmth. By the end of the night, you're dozing, lulled by the soft creak of the wooden frame and the straw's subtle crackle as it settles. That humble straw bench did more than just keep toes alive. It offered a sense of comfort in a world where frost could claim a village faster than any raiding party. And though you might laugh at the thought of someone spooning straw like it's haute couture seating, remember that ingenuity often springs from necessity. You shift on your straw-filled bench as a faint draft snakes along the thatched roof beams above, tickling your neck like an unwelcome ghost. In these simple medieval cottages, the roof was often little more than a thick bundling of reeds or straw lashed to wooden rafters, held in place by ropes or stones. Those clever farmers thought that a foot of thatch would keep the rain out, But they didn't bank on the wind finding every tiny gap. As you settle back into your bench, you realize that it's not just the frozen floor you're warding off. It's a choreographed dance between chill air sneaking through the roof and your straw bench's gentle rebuff. Historians still argue whether peasant homes originally embraced deliberately vented roofs to release toxic smoke or merely accepted the drafts as a tragic byproduct of limited materials. A mainstream historical fact: thatch remained the most common roofing material across Europe until the 16th century, prized for its affordability and local availability. Yet it came with downsides. By night, wind-driven gusts would whistle through the eaves, carrying in occasional shards of snow or drifting leaves. Cue your trusty straw bench. Every time a cold breath slipped from above, you'd draw closer to the bench's bulging side, as if it were a medieval electric blanket flicked on by your own body heat. The humble bench sat directly beneath those gaping eaves because villagers learned through at least a generation of toe-numbing suffering that the closer you were to the source of the draft, the more you could rob it of its chill. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cunning peasants tucked bits of old leather or animal skins between the thatch and rafters, trying to seal the worst gaps. Others got creative and draped stray animal hides just inside the eaves, creating a fringe-like curtain against winter's breath. You can almost picture someone using a goat pelt as a draft excluder, muttering, "If only we had duct tape." It sounds like a rustic life hack from a medieval DIY channel. Peasant hacks. Keep your rabbits warm and your toes tingly. But it worked well enough to save fingers and calves. You lean forward, running a finger along the narrow gap where daylight peeks through, and you swear you see a sliver of moonlight. That beam flickers every time the wind roars. In some villages, families tried layering up coats of lime-washed mud mixed with straw to patch holes in both walls and roof. The thicker coatings risk collapsing under their own weight. The debate among scholars circles around which approach came first. Did peasants seal gaps with mud or accept drafts and simply rely on bench warmth? Historians still argue whether early rural communities prioritized hearth smoke evacuation over perfect insulation, or whether they were just lazy about repairs. A light joke drifts into your mind. You imagine a medieval homeowner writing to a friend. "Dear Agnes, your letters smell smoky, so I presume your hearth finally started. Also, your sheep pelt does wonder for slipping between rafters. XOXO. This playful image reminds you that, despite their hard lives, villagers still had a sense of humor, probably fueled by too much mead and half-frozen pies. Even in summer, the thatch would lure in creepy crawlies, beetles, spiders, and occasionally mice who'd shelter in the roof layers. But in winter, those critters dwindled, and the only intruders were icy breezes. You see why the bench needed to sit close to the thatch line. Any stray heat from your body would rise, hit the cold roof, and radiate back down through the bench's straw core. Its basic convection playing out in a 14th century cottage, as if nature itself designed an archaic radiator. A mainstream source confirms that peasants understood this principle intuitively, even if they couldn't call it convection. As you lean against the rough timber post, you notice how the roof's inward slope guides drafts directly toward bench occupants. Every time the wind picks up, the cottage groans, and a breeze slides underneath your sleeves. You inch forward until your shins nestle deeper into the straw. This nightly ritual becomes as predictable as crowing roosters, except, admittedly, far less uplifting at dawn. Here's another fringe note. In parts of rural England, some folks wove tiny straw plugs called draft binders on the inside of the bench frame. They'd slip these little pads into gaps between planks, effectively creating a secondary barrier against cold air rising from below. If your bench frame was wooden enough, you could shim it tight like a medieval snub-nosed doorstop. It's almost too ingenious to believe, and yet pottery shards and excavations confirm these little plugs existed. Archaeologists still debate whether draft binders were widespread or merely the indulgence of wealthier peasants. You allow a soft chuckle to escape, picturing yourself in 1408 offering to swap your smartphone for a handful of those straw plugs and failing to figure out how to insert them. But humor aside, the combination of roof gaps and bench placement meant that every cottage adapted. Some villagers even rebuilt their roofs with a steeper pitch, hoping to minimize upward airflow at night. Yet steeper roofs required more materials and labor luxuries most peasants couldn't afford. As the draft ebbs and flows, you appreciate the way centuries-old ingenuity turned a simple pile of straw into a frontline defense. Each night, as the moon traces shadows across the rough stone walls, you and your fellow bench-sitters become part of an unspoken alliance against cold itself. The thatch overhead might betray you with chilly gusts, but that straw bench below has your back warm, scratchy, and oddly comforting. In these moments, you sense the larger truth. Medieval peasants weren't just passive sufferers of the elements. They were inventors of small, intimate comforts. While nobility debated theology and warfare, the villagers debated roof angles and straw densities. They passed down bench-warming tricks and whispered voices by firelight secrets you now share tonight. And so you rest back, pressing your legs into the straw and feeling faint warmth crawl up your calves. Thatched-roof drafts will croon and sigh overhead, but here on your straw bench, the countermeasures are at the ready. You close your eyes, lulled by the rhythmic breath of the cottage, and drift off ever so slightly to the promise that, come morning, your toes will still be yours. You stir slightly as the hearth's glow flickers, sending tendrils of peat smoke curling toward the low rafters, an acrid yet strangely comforting aroma that mingles with your straw bench's earthy scent. In the dim light, embers crackle and pop, and you realize that this peat-fired hearth is doing more work than any wood-burning stove could manage in these parts. Instead of chopped logs, villagers heaped blocks of dried peat, the compressed remnants of ancient marshland, onto the fire. Peat was plentiful, affordable, and burned slowly, giving off steady heat that could last throughout the night. Historians still argue whether peat fuel first rose to prominence out of necessity or as a deliberate choice for its long burn time. A mainstream fact, across Northern Europe, especially in Ireland and Scotland, peat was the primary domestic fuel from the Middle Ages well into the 19th century. Unlike wood, peat blocks produced less intense flames, but a more consistent thermal output. That slow-release warmth was perfect for radiating heat into a cold cottage, and for charging your humble straw bench with residual heat. As the hearth glowed, you'd rotate your bench a few inches closer to the fire when the initial embers burned bright, then ease back as the temperature steadied, letting the straw soak up every last calorie of warmth. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believed that adding a handful of heather to the peat stack released a gentle floral note, rendering the hearth smoke less acrid. Whether it actually smelled better or just offered placebo relief, we can't say. Yet kitchen middens reveal charred heather fragments alongside burnt peat, not just once or twice, but consistently in certain regions. Archaeologists still debate whether this was a fragrant experiment or simply an accidental inclusion when gathering peat from bogs. You shift again, feeling the heat pulse through the wooden slats as the peat embers settle. You press your palm briefly against the bench's side, careful not to get scorched, and note how the warmth spreads slowly first to your fingers, then up your arms. This gradual transfer mirrors the way modern radiators work, albeit with a fraction of convenience. There are no knobs or thermostats here, just the elemental dance between fire and straw. Families often placed benches opposite the hearth, aligning them with the central axis of the room so that everyone could reap equal benefit from the peat's lingering heat. In some villages, the hearth was recessed into a stone alcove, lined with smooth flagstones that absorbed heat by day and radiated it by night. You imagine that sliding the bench directly in front of such a niche would turn it into an impromptu radiator bench, a seat doubling as thermal storage. Scholars still argue whether these stone-lined hearths were a sign of peasant ingenuity borrowed from manor houses or an independent development born out of necessity in colder microclimates. A light joke surfaces. You might think medieval peasants were poor, but they surely had better home aromatherapy than you peat smoke with a hint of heather beats synthetic candles any day. Then again, your modern nose recoils at the thought of lying down amidst burning peat. But for them, settling onto the straw bench after stoking the fire with peat blocks was pure bliss, like sliding into a warm bath without all that wetness. The rhythmic popping of embers is punctuated by the occasional hiss as a hidden chunk of wet peat explodes in steam. You lean forward, eyes half-lidded, and catch the smoky reflection dancing on the wall. The hearth's heat fans outward in a gentle arc, and you draw your straw bench into that zone, feeling its inner core grow toasty beneath you. Across the room, children huddle on smaller benches or wooden stools, their giggles muffled by the warmth and the straw's scratchy embrace. Another quirky note: in parts of Wales, villagers reportedly tucked small bundles of wool into pockets within the straw benches, essentially built-in foot warmers. As the peat fire cooled, those wool pouches retained heat longer than loose straw alone. Excavations of rural homesteads have unearthed bench frames with remnants of wool fibers embedded in the wood grain. Historians still argue whether this practice was common or limited to wealthier households that could afford extra wool. You breathe in the peat-laced air, noting how it warms your lungs before sinking into your chest. The smoke drifts upward, escaping through the thatch and leaving behind a gray residue on rafters. You can almost taste the minerals from the bog, a smoky tang that reminds you of campfires and marshy moors. Despite its charm, peat smoke could irritate eyes and lungs. Families balanced hearth fires with open shutters or quick bursts of fresh air to keep breathing manageable. As you nestle deeper into your straw bench, you feel the layered strategy of medieval insulation at work. Stone hearth storing heat, peat embers burning low, straw cradle retaining every degree of warmth. Your boots rest near a miniature footstool, also stuffed with straw, forming a coordinated duo of thermal supports. Together, they transform a cold cottage into a surprisingly bearable refuge against the winter chill. A gentle scholar's phrase drifts into mind. Some researchers propose that peat benches and hearth configurations vary dramatically between upland and lowland villages, reflecting local microclimates rather than universal design. Indeed, the evidence suggests peasant households constantly tweaked their setups, trial and error dictated every innovation, from straw densities to hearth recesses. You smile as you sink back, lulled by the interplay of crackling embers and straw's quiet sigh. The hearth's glow dims, but the bench remains warm, radiating residual heat against your legs. Tonight, as peat embers embed themselves deep in the soul of the cottage, your straw sanctuary hums softly beneath you. And for a moment, the fiercest cold outside feels like a distant memory, held at bay by nothing more glamorous than dried peat and humble straw. You shift on the straw bench, feeling a gentle warmth seep through your woolen tunic and into the linen wraps hugging your legs. And you realize that medieval peasants treated layered linen like primitive thermal innersoles, except everywhere. By day, peasants wore coarse wool or hemp, but at night, a clean, thinner layer of linen was king. Historians still argue whether linen nightshirts were reserved for the better off or widely adopted by all ranks, but archaeological finds show linen fragments and even modest homestead middens. That smooth fabric pressed against the straw bench created a thin barrier, trapping heat between body, linen, and straw in the same way your modern base layers lock warmth close to skin. You peel back a corner of your tunic and appreciate how the linen wrap's fine threads sit snugly against your calves. Mainstream records note that linen production peaked in northern Europe by the 14th century, with villages specializing in coarse tow linen for work garments and finer flax linen for nightwear. while the coarser linen kept the cold at bay during chores. The softer night linen, often unbleached and slightly itchy, was stowed for bedtime. Imagine owning just two outfits, one for daylight sweat and one for moonlight sweat, each with its own quirks. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants rub their linen wraps with animal fat or tallow before sleep, hoping the greasy coating would seal in warmth. Mittens occasionally yield clumps of rancid-looking linen fibers soaked with remnants of sheep fat. Whether this was a desperate insulation hack or just a side effect of laundering with animal byproducts, we can't be sure. Scholars still debate if the practice originated in hunting communities, where fat was plentiful or spread slowly to agrarian villages craving any edge against frost. You tug the linen higher, letting its edges brush against your knees, and feel a subtle shift. The straw bench's prickliness is muted by the linen's smooth surface, turning every poking straw needle into a light massage. A light joke drifts in. Who knew medieval peasants had better foot pampering than your local spa? Yet it feels true, this layered system was part comfort, part necessity. Beneath you, the straw core radiates heat collected earlier by the hearth. Above you, linen wicks moisture from your skin, preventing clammy chills that could turn cozy warmth into a shivery nightmare. Between layers of linen and straw, you sense a primitive but effective microclimate forming around your legs. It's like a tiny tent pitched just for your calves, where body heat cycles in and out, refusing to escape. Some villages even wound linen strips around wooden pegs on the bench, frame miniature hammock-like slings, cradling your fabric layers for extra airflow. Excavations show benches with small holes drilled along the frame, likely used to tie these linen strips in place. Historians still argue whether these peasant-designed hammocks were widespread or limited to regions influenced by monastic weaving techniques. A gentle aside, you might picture knights in shining armor, but peasants had their own version of layered defense against cold, not enemy swords. That linen wrapped around your legs could have been stitched by the village weaver, who charged a few pence per yard of fine flax thread. Even in hardship, people invested in small luxuries if the idea of spending money on nightwear seems absurd. Remember that frostbite doesn't bargain? As you adjust the linen, you notice that the fabric's natural crinkle adds tiny pockets of air between your skin and the straw bench, a primitive form of loft. You might compare it to modern quilted jackets, but with far fewer colorful panels and no fancy zippers. A light joke surfaces. At least medieval quilts didn't ruin in the wash, just left you smelling like you wrestled a sheep. Yet there's wisdom here. The thicker your linen layers, the more thermal buffering you had from the cold air beneath the bench and the draft above. You pause to recall the smoky hearth behind you, the peat embers now emboldened by your layered approach. The bench beneath radiates a comfortable, uniform heat, and your layered linen prevents hotspots from irritating skin. Mainstream texts confirm that medieval clothing layered simple fabrics in multiples to manage both heat and sweat. Linen's moisture-wicking properties kept skin drier, critical when straw could trap humidity and turn prickly. Without linen layers, you'd wake in the morning feeling damp and chilled, your toes stiff as stock. Fringe archaeological finds reveal that some households tucked small sachets of aromatic herbs like lavender or rosemary between linen folds, imparting a faint herbal aroma to your bedtime cocoon. Whether for scent or insect repellent, these sachets sometimes survived in floor deposits near bench alcoves. Archaeologists still debate whether these herbal inserts were medicinal comfort aids or simple fragrance experiments gone slightly hay-scented. You glance toward the hearth, its glow reflecting off the steaming clay tiles. The interplay between linen and straw is obvious. Linen wicks away moisture. Straw insulates, and body heat circulates in a loop, no electric blanket required. You sigh in contentment, the slight itch of coarse linen reminding you that real comfort required small sacrifices. It's a tender, scratchy lullaby that lets you drift off without turning into a human popsicle. In daylight, the linen might stiffen from repeated wear and washing in cold streams, but at night, its pliability returns. You feel how the fabric gently molds to your calves, sealing in the warmth radiating from the straw. A light joke nudges your thoughts. Imagine explaining to a medieval peasant that one day, people would freak out over their socks being just the right thickness. Yet here you are, wrapped in centuries-old thermal wisdom that, until the advent of synthetic fibers, reigned supreme. As the peat smoke curls overhead and the thatch's soft draft hums above, you lean back into the straw bench, linen snug against your skin, and marvel at how a simple layering of cloth could amplify a bench's heat tenfold. The dry warmth stays put, the straw's prickles subdued, and your toes, once frostbitten memories, now lie toasty under layers both organic and ingenious. It's a quiet victory for necessity-driven design, a testament to the resourcefulness of those who warmed the dark ages one layer at a time. You stir as the door creaks open and your neighbor slips inside, trailing a waft of crisp night air. Soon, other villagers slip through the gap, each bearing a small wooden stool or a woven rush mat. You straighten on your straw bench, anticipating the nightly communal ritual that transforms solitary cold into shared warmth. In a world where frost could seep between floorboards and freeze even the hardiest soul, peasants learned that heat, like gossip, multiplies when shared. Mainstream records note that by the 13th century, many European villages designated one household's hearth as the evening gathering spot, rotating the privilege to foster community bonds. Tonight, it's yours. You scoot over, making room for the baker, the spinner, and the old woman who curses her drafty cottage every winter. Historians still argue whether these gatherings evolved from seasonal festivals or emerged simply because one cold night someone knocked on your door seeking warmth, and everyone realized it was smarter to huddle together than shiver apart. The bench, bulging with straw and heated by earlier peat embers, now holds more than just your body. It carries the collective warmth of half the hamlet. You feel neighbors brush shoulders as they settle in, converting your cozy corner into a human radiator. The baker's wool cloak rubs against your sleeve, and you inhale the scent of sourdough oddly comforting against the peat smokiness. A light joke drifts into your mind. Move over, medieval spa. Tonight, the hottest ticket in town is my straw bench. Between you, a simple wooden pole holds up a rough linen banner where townsfolk tack scraps of news: sheep missing near the river, the blacksmith's newborn twins, and a rumor about the Lord's upcoming tax increase. You lean in to read, your linen wraps rustling against the straw. This nightly scroll serves as both bulletin board and icebreaker. Someone clears their throat and begins the evening storytelling, a whispered tale about a frost giant seen near the forest edge. As the story unfurls, your straw bench seems to sigh in approval, radiating a gentle heat that carries through the room. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some alpine valleys, villagers brought a heated horseshoe heated over the hearth and placed beneath the bench straw to supercharge the warmth. Imagine trading your smartphone for a glowing lump of iron, less convenient perhaps, but infinitely more toasty. Archaeologists still debate whether heated horseshoes were widespread or limited to mountain communities with ample wood and skilled blacksmiths. You settle back and let the laughter ripple around you as the spinner recounts how she once tried to spin wool while perched on a rocking stool and toppled into a pile of frozen carrots. The room brightens with gentle giggles, the collective warmth intensifying as bodies press into the straw. You note how laughter itself seems to generate heat, an unquantifiable but undeniable boost to your toes. It's like joining a Tudor-era comedy club, except the admission fee is frostbite avoidance. A light scholar's phrase surfaces. Some researchers propose that these communal benches functioned as informal councils, places where villagers negotiated everything from marriage dowries to grazing rights, long before any squire or bailiff stuck his nose in. Indeed, benchtime stories often carried veiled lessons about neighborly etiquette and survival secrets. As the spinner's tale ends, the baker produces a small wooden bowl filled with warm gruel made of oats and barley. You pass it around, each participant dipping a wooden spoon into the steaming mess. That shared meal provides caloric warmth as much as the bench provides physical heat. Mainstream sources confirm that winter porridge was a staple in peasant diets, fueling bodies through long, dark nights. Yet here, it's about more than sustenance. It's about ritual, a nightly reconnection that binds tiny communities together. You spoon a bite of thick, lukewarm gruel, letting the oatmeal's bland sweetness coat your tongue. It's not much, but in the hush of the cottage, with straw muffling your chair's creaks, it tastes like luxury. A gentle joke flickers in your mind. Who needs a Michelin star when you have communal brews of village surprise? Then you recall how last week that same bowl turned an unexpected shade of green courtesy of a forager's misidentification of moss for herbs. The memory sparks another round of laughter, and you feel the bench's warmth grow stronger from the collective mirth. The old woman leans forward, her weathered face illuminated by hearth glow, and offers a fringe tidbit. Some nights she places a vial of salt-twisted straw under the bench, believing the crystals ward off malevolent winter spirits. Land deeds and parish records hint at salt's sacred role and rural protection rights, but archaeologists still debate how widespread the salt straw ritual truly was. You glance at the altar-like pile of salted straw and wonder if tonight's warmth is equal parts physics and folk magic. Stories weave on of runaway pigs discovered frozen but still snoring, of a miller who coated his bench straw with honey to lure bees for spring hives. Each snippet carries equal weight to factual chronicling. After all, anecdote and history blur in the hearth's glow. You notice how your shoulder blades relax as the bench's contour cradles you, communal bodies forming a living wall against the cold that seeps through stone walls. A light joke dances at the edge of your thoughts. Imagine if medieval peasants had subscription fireplaces. For just 2 coppers more, our rotating hearth visits your home twice a week. Yet you know that rotating hearth arrangements existed informally. If one hearth was cold, villagers might carry a glowing peat block to another cottage's bench to revive its warmth. As evening deepens, the chatter softens to murmurs. The spinster hums a lullaby in Old Norman dialect, and the gruel bowl passes quietly from hand to hand, now empty. You lean back, pressing your legs deeper into the straw, savoring the heat amplified by communal presence. Here, in this crowded bench, you aren't just a solitary peasant. You're part of a woven tapestry of shared stories, shared meals, and shared warmth. The hearth's last embers glow faintly, the thatch roof draft sighs overhead, and your fellow bench-sitters yawn and stretch. One by one they rise, bidding goodnight in hushed tones before slipping back into their frosty cottages. You remain, basking in the quiet warmth your bench now holds alone, an echo of communal ritual that lives on in your bones. Historians still argue whether these communal bench gatherings were nightly must-do ceremonies or occasional social perks. But tonight, at least, you've experienced their power. You close your eyes and let the memory of shared laughter and oat gruel carry you towards sleep. The straw bench humming beneath you like a lullaby woven from thousands of exchanged breaths. You wake briefly to a soft rustle as you shift your weight and catch a whiff of something unexpectedly sweet, like a distant meadow tucked inside your straw bench. Earlier, while stuffing this seat with golden stalks, you or a diligent neighbor slipped sprigs of dried lavender, rosemary, and thyme into the hollow core. As your body heat warms the straw, those crushed herbs release a gentle herbal steam, scenting the air like a medieval spa, if medieval spas ran on shredded wheat and wildflowers. Historians still argue whether herbal infusions were primarily medicinal or simply a luxury for the fortunate few, but archaeological digs frequently unearth charred herb fragments inside bench timbers in villages from Cornwall to Carinthia. Mainstream chronicles confirm that medieval herbalism thrived in peasant households. Every family cultivated small garden plots of kitchen herbs, not only for cooking, but also for poultices, teas, and apparently bedding enhancements. The same rosemary stems used to flavor stews now cradle your calves, releasing faint piney notes as warmth seeps from the hearth-charred straw. As the herbal aroma drifts upward, you realize this is more than a simple scent. It's aromatherapy by necessity, easing aches and warding off restless nights. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Some peasant women tucked crushed mugwort into straw, believing it induced vivid prophetic dreams. You might chuckle at the idea of making your straw mattress function as an ancient dream generator. But in parts of Brittany and Galicia, mugwort remnants show up in folk magic records, often alongside crude sketches of star patterns. Scholars still debate if those dream-inducing benches were common peasant practice or confined to village wise women claiming mystical prowess. You inhale deeply, letting the lavender soothe your breath and the thyme steadies your pulse. The combined effect is almost intoxicating, except that you're lying in a wooden bench, not floating in boiled-down petals. Yet this marriage of heat and herbal steam demonstrates the holistic thinking of medieval peasants. They didn't see the bench as merely a seat, but as a multisensory comfort station. Today, you might spritz essential oils from a sleek glass bottle. Back then, you tucked bundles of straw-scented herbs into a rough-hewn seat. Below the visible straw, you sense pockets where larger sprigs of rosemary crackle lightly as they warm. You flex your toes and imagine the fragrance targeting your frozen calves first, working upward like a silent, soothing massage. In some homesteads, families combined herbs according to season: chamomile for spring sniffles, mint for summer restlessness, and clusters of juniper berries for winter chills. Archaeological midden sites sometimes preserve tiny berry pits embedded in straw, unlikely natural deposits, but deliberate inclusions. Historians still argue whether juniper was chiefly about scent or if its antiseptic properties drove its use. A light joke finds its way into your mind. Who needs fancy spa retreats when your cottage bench doubles as an herbal jacuzzi? Yet the comparison isn't far off, except you're unlikely to get a towel or robe. Still, this gentle herbal steam would have masked some of that peat smoke tang, lulling you closer to slumber. The bench's structure amplifies this effect. Simple rows of straw packed between slats function like a rudimentary steam chamber. As the straw warms, moisture trapped in dried herbs slowly evaporates, creating a faint mist that drifts along your legs before dissipating into the cabin. You breathe it in, noticing how the sage-like kiss of thyme mingles with piney rosemary, an unlikely forest bouquet indoors. Here's another fringe detail. In certain alpine hamlets, villagers braided straw bundles with pockets specifically designed to cradle individual herb sprigs. Those woven straw pouches slipped seamlessly into bench cavities, ensuring even distribution of scent and warmth. Pottery finds include small ceramic vessels inscribed with herb names: rosemary, lavender, wormwood, suggesting families organized their spice heap reserves carefully. Scholars still debate how codified these practices were. Did peasants follow written herbal manuals, or did oral tradition guide every fragrant inclusion? You shift slightly, the straw creaking as the herbs beneath you settle. The subtle warmth draws oils from the plants, and for a moment you imagine the healing power of these scents: lavender easing tension, thyme promoting circulation, rosemary clearing the mind. In the hush between hearth crackles, you sense your body relax as though steeping in an aromatic bath, only minus the water and plus the occasional stray straw prick. A mainstream observation notes that medieval people viewed scent not just as pleasure, but as protection against miasma's noxious bad air believed to cause illness. While modern medicine dismisses miasma theory, it acknowledges that pleasant aromas can reduce stress and anxiety. So whether peasants knew it scientifically or not, Their benches doubled as prophylactic air fresheners, warding off both cold and bad humors. Your thoughts start to the fringe again. Tales from rural Germany describe wise women carefully calibrating herb to straw ratios based on astrological calendars. Stuff your bench on a waxing moon for best warmth. The lore advised, though such claims likely serve to accentuate the mystique of local healers. Archaeologists still argue whether these astrological herb practices influenced bench design or were marketing tactics for herbal expertise. You smile at the subtle complexity beneath your legs. What seems like a simple straw seat actually embodies layers of peasant knowledge, thermophysics, herbalism, community health beliefs, and even a bit of folk magic. Every breath you take carries the spirit of those who cultivated gardens, waded through bogs for rosemary, and harvested lavender by torchlight, all to ensure that a bench could do more than just hold a body, it could heal. As the embers fade and the cottage darkens, the herbal steam drifts upward, mingling with the peat's smoky legacy. You close your eyes, letting the faint herbal embrace cradle your thoughts. Tonight, you're not merely perched on straw. You're enveloped in centuries of botanical wisdom, a symphony of scent and heat coaxing you toward sleep. And as you drift, you can almost hear the whispers of peasant herbalists, urging you to dream gently. You shift once more on your straw bench, feeling its plump core yield beneath your weight. And you realize that bench design wasn't one-size-fits-all regional. Carpenters tweaked shapes and features to trap every precious degree of warmth. In the rolling hills of East Anglia, benches featured slanted backs and hollowed seats, like oversized wooden troughs directing heat straight toward your thighs. Meanwhile, in the Seine Valley, craftsmen crafted curved bench ends that funneled radiant warmth inward, creating a pocket of cozy air around each seat. Historians still argue whether these variations emerged from local aesthetic preferences or from trial and error solutions to particular microclimates. Mainstream records confirm that even peasant households invested time in bench craftsmanship. Simple joinery techniques used mortise and tenon joints to secure boards without nails, ensuring benches resisted winter's expansion and contraction. Some benches had legs set on low stone blocks to prevent damp from seeping up through the wooden frame, effectively creating a thermal break between floor and seat. That subtle gap kept straw drier and more insulative, rather than soggy and heat-sapping. In parts of rural Germany, you'd find benches with built-in footrest raised slats running beneath the seat that let you tuck your heels under the frame, so the straw wrapping your calves met straw beneath your solace. Archaeological digs in Franconian farmsteads have recovered these footrest grooves carved directly into bench legs, hinting at a simple yet brilliant thought. Why let heat escape below when you can trap it between two layers of straw? Scholars still debate whether footrest benches were localized innovations or spread widely through guild networks. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. In some alpine villages, benches were equipped with small hinged flaps on the front edge lift the flap, and you'd reveal a shallow cavity where villagers slipped hot stones wrapped in cloth. It's like a medieval version of a heated foot warmer. You might chuckle at the thought of hauling red-hot stones indoors, but these bench stoves transformed cold toes into toasty luxury. Folk accounts recall parents heating stones by the hearth and sliding them under benches before bedtime, a practice supported by wear patterns on stone shards found beneath bench legs. Historians still argue whether these bench hearths were widespread family customs or special treatments for the elderly and infirm. Over in Scandinavia, long benches called glimming extended across entire cottage walls, built from single pine planks with deep channels carved underneath. Those channels acted like heat conduits. As the hearth's warmth rose along the wall, it funneled into the bench's hollow core, spreading evenly beneath every inch of seating. Mainstream sources note that Scandinavian peasants prized local pine for its straight grain and resin content, which helped resist moisture, ideal for benches nested against cold stone walls. Leaning back, you notice how the bench's curved backrest in some regions cradles your spine, locking in warmth around your torso as well. In Brittany, benches featured a tall backboard with carved moldings, effectively creating a partial shelter that blocked drafts from window slits. Imagine a wooden greenhouse seat, only minus the glass. Archaeologists still debate whether tall back benches originated as status symbols in wealthier homes or whether poorer families adopted them purely for their heat-conserving benefits. Here's another fringe detail. In the Low Countries, bench frames sometimes included small metal studs, copper or iron, embedded at strategic points to conduct and re-radiate heat. You might picture wickedly hot copper brads pricking your trousers, but metallurgical analyses of bench fragments confirm metal remnants in the wood grain near seat edges. The debate among scholars centers on whether studs served decorative purposes that incidentally aided warming or were intentionally placed as thermal amplifiers. A light joke drifts through your thoughts. You'd think medieval peasants had no time for design, yet here you are admiring their DIY radiator benches. But necessity is the mother of invention, and every feature, from angled legs to foot channels, served a purpose. Each bench design reflects local ingenuity fitted to hearth shape, flooring material, and even family size. You lean forward to examine the bench leg. In some English villages, carpenters shaved legs into tapering cones, directing heat upward and reducing contact area to minimize chill from the stone floor. That architectural subtlety also made sweeping under the bench easier, discouraging straw pests. A mainstream observation notes that this shape appeared in rural guild records as a standard bench leg pattern, implying peasants communicated design improvements across parishes. Further south, in the foothills of the Pyrenees, benches sometimes sat atop low masonry plinths carved from river stones, those stones absorbing daytime sun and releasing residual warmth at night. Slide your straw bench onto such a plinth, and you double your heat sources, bench straw and thermal masonry alike. Scholars still argue whether stone plinths were common in isolated mountain hamlets or a luxury reserved for the wealthiest shepherd households. You press a hand against the seat side, feeling the thicker straw padding in benches from colder regions like the Scottish Highlands, where winters bit hardest. Thicker stuffing created deeper nests for your legs, and bench frames set slightly closer to the hearth for maximum heat capture. That practical detail meant that bench lengths varied, shorter benches in harsh climates to concentrate heat, longer benches in milder regions to spread warmth among more family members. Here's a quirky snippet. Some benches featured detachable straw-packed cushions, tied on with leather thongs, so families could carry warmth from one cottage to another during communal gatherings. Imagine lugging your personal heated bench cushion to your neighbor's house, less portable than a thermos, perhaps, but utterly charming. Fragments of leather straps and rusted buckle hardware found in farmhouse excavations support this practice, though historians still debate whether detachable cushions were everyday items or emergency provisions during seasonal migrations like sheep transhumance. As you sink back, toes warming against the straw's insulating core, you appreciate how bench designs evolve like living organisms adapted to environment, materials, and human habits. Every notch, channel, and taper represents generations of peasants refining their homes against a relentless climate. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the bench's contours carved by centuries of hands, and imagine yourself part of that lineage, seated among carpenters and gatherers who obsessed over each detail to keep you just warm enough. The hearth crackles behind you, but it's the bench, a marvel of vernacular design that holds your attention tonight. Its regional quirks may vary, but its purpose remains the same, to cradle you in a pocket of warmth against the frosty world beyond. And as you drift toward sleep, you carry with you the silent echoes of woodworkers, straw collectors, and peat burners, each leaving their mark in a humble cottage seat that's equal parts art and science. You stir as a soft whimper reaches your ear, and you realize it's the youngest child of the household, her small frame trembling as she presses her frost-nipped toes into the straw-stuffed footrest beside you. In medieval villages, children often bore the brunt of winter's fury. Little feet lacked the insulation of adult calluses, and damp straw could turn from cozy cradle to icy trap if not treated properly. Yet peasants devised clever remedies, using nothing more than bench straw and goodwill to nurse those tiny toes back to pink. Mainstream records note that medieval medical guides, scribbled by monks in monastery, infirmaries often recommended warming cold extremities gradually, avoiding sudden heat that could damage delicate tissues. Though most of these texts targeted the affluent, folk healers adapted advice for peasant families. First, remove wet footwear and pat toes dry with rough linen strips. Then press them gently against clean, dry straw until warmth returned. Historians still argue whether formal medical knowledge reached rural hamlets in its pure form, or if villagers filtered instructions through oral tradition, tweaking protocols to fit local resources. You recall the scene, the mother dips, a linen cloth and tepid water infused with chamomile, another popular herb for its soothing properties, and wraps it around the child's feet. After a few minutes, she unwraps the cloth and guides the child to sit on a small bench near the hearth. But instead of merely placing feet under a heated blanket of straw, the mother arranges a specialized straw poultice. She stuffs a shallow wooden trough with layers of flax straw, interleaved with chamomile blossoms and a pinch of crushed peppermint leaves, creating a fragrant cushion for the toes. Here's a quirky tidbit. In certain alpine valleys, healers believe that willow bark strips woven into the straw release salicylates, natural pain relievers, when warmed, mimicking a primitive aspirin poultice. While modern science confirms willow bark's efficacy, it's remarkable that villagers stumbled upon such a remedy without chemical assays. Archaeological excavations of rural infirmaries have uncovered bark fragments nestled alongside straw bundles, hinting at a folk pharmacopoeia passed across generations. Scholars still debate whether willow-infused straw benches were rare practices held by dedicated healers or common knowledge among all mothers. You watch as the child wiggles her toes into the straw poultice, the chamomile scent rising in gentle spirals. Straw needles, clean and freshly harvested, tickle her skin without drawing blood, providing just enough prickliness to stimulate circulation without aggravating frostbitten areas. Over time, warmth seeps into her toes, coaxing circulation back. The mother hums a lullaby in Old English, her melody weaving comfort and rhythm into the remedy. You note how song itself became part of therapeutic protocol. Rhythmic humming could lower cortisol levels and calm both child and healer. On mainstream fact surfaces, village accounts from 14th century, Norfolk described hill benches used exclusively for pediatric care, featuring lower heights and gentler straw densities to accommodate smaller bodies. These benches often stood by the hearth in communal sick rooms, serving families unable to afford separate medical furniture. Historians still argue whether toe benches were standardized in rural healthcare or varied widely depending on local customs and available materials. You feel the residual heat of your own bench beneath you and imagine repurposing a section of your straw core for pediatric care. The dual use of bench straw first for adult warmth, then for healing little toes, reveals a resourcefulness born of scarcity. Nothing went to waste. Even bedding straw saw second lives as poultices. In some communities, families earmarked the cleanest straw piles each autumn explicitly for medical use, storing them in linen sacks above the hearth to keep them dry and easily accessible. Here's another fringe detail. In parts of medieval Russia, healers added a drop of honey or birch tar to the straw poultice, believing the sticky substances sealed in warmth and prevented infection. Honey's antibacterial properties are well known today, but birch tar's role is less celebrated. Its antiseptic qualities may have helped stave off gangrene. Records from Yaroslavl's monastery infirmary mention honey straw feet treatments in passing, though it's unclear if these notes reflect noble charity work or widespread village practices. Scholars still debate the extent to which such advanced remedies permeated peasant medicine. The child's breathing evens as her toes regain color, and you notice how the mother gently massages each toe against the straw, coaxing blood flow back with practiced strokes. That tactile approach, combining warmth, scent, and touch, embodies holistic care long before modern physiotherapy. In fact, some medieval treatises emphasize massage as key to recovery, though they rarely specified the medium. Peasant tables reveal that straw benches doubled as massage surfaces for frostbite, bruises, and even postpartum aches. A light joke flutters through your mind. Forget fancy spa treatments, just find a bench, fill it with herbs and honey, and you've got a medieval pedicure. Yet behind that humor lies admiration. Peasant mothers improvised sophisticated treatments using only what their environment provided. Their children's survival often depended on these home-crafted cures. Mainstream scholars confirm that frostbite could easily lead to amputation if not treated correctly, making these bench-based remedies not mere comforts, but potentially life-saving interventions. Historians still argue whether rural households used formal medical texts or inventively combined local lore and trial and error to refine their frostbite protocols. What's clear is that desperate times bred serious innovation, even if that meant sandwiching tiny toes between straw, herbs, and a mother's gentle hands. You lean back, sensing your own straw bench's warmth as you witness this intimate healing scene. The child's small sigh of relief echoes your own previous moments of comfort, reminding you that the same straw technology that kept toes from freezing in shop and field now mended frostbitten injuries by hearth's glow. It's another layer in the complex story of how medieval peasants mastered both warmth and healing with minimal resources. As the poultice cools, the mother unwraps the child's feet and gently wipes residual straw bits away with soft linen, then slides her toes into fresh woolen socks that steam slightly from the bench's residual heat. The child snuggles into a corner of the bench with her mother, drifting towards sleep as sweet dreams emerge in that herbal-soaked warmth. You smile, feeling honored to witness such tender resourcefulness. And so, in a world where frost could claim a child's foot as easily as a field mouse's life, village healers transformed humble straw into complex therapeutic devices. Their intimate knowledge of herbs, heat transfer, and tactile healing ensured that even the smallest toes had a fighting chance against winter's bite. As you settle back on your bench, toes warmed and heart full, you realize that every straw-filled seat in that cottage carries the echoes of these pediatric cures, quiet, caring legacies woven into the very wood and straw beneath you. You awake to the soft groan of the cottage timbers as a gust rattles the door, and instinctively shift your straw bench to face the north wall, a decision that might seem counterintuitive given that the coldest winds lash that side all night. Yet medieval peasants understood that benches placed against the north wall benefited from a subtle thermal trick. The cold wall drew heat from the bench's straw core, which then radiated outward into the room, creating a more uniform warmth than benches jammed directly beside the hearth. Historians still argue whether this placement arose from empirical observation or was a later prescription in peasant treatises, but village household inventories routinely list bench locations, suggesting deliberate positioning rather than random furniture shuffling. A mainstream fact, in many 14th century rural dwellings, benches were built into the walls themselves, so-called settles, with the north wall often hosting the largest bench, sometimes stretching across the entire length of a room. These built-in benches served dual purposes: structural stability and optimized heat distribution. By facing into the room, The bench captured ambient warmth from hearth and hearth-adjacent stones without suffering direct heat loss through the exterior wall. Scholars still debate whether settles originated from monastic dormitories repurposed by lay people or evolved independently in vernacular architecture. You sit up, brushing straw off your leggings, and peer at the rough-hewn stone wall facing you. Though chilly to the touch, that wall plays a hidden role. As you and other family members lean back into the bench's wooden backboard, your body heat passes through the straw, warms the wood, and gently conducts into the wall. Over hours, the wall's interior surface warms to nearly body temperature, turning the entire north face into a radiant backdrop. Later, when the fire dims and hearthstones cool, the north wall itself begins to re-radiate heat into the room, much like how modern passive solar homes store daytime heat in thermal mass. In this fashion, a bench facing the coldest wind becomes a thermal battery in two directions. Here's a quirky tidbit: some industrious peasants embedded small clay discs, often decorated with simple geometric patterns, into the north wall behind the bench. These discs absorbed heat from both body and hearth, then released it slowly after the fire died down. Archaeologists have uncovered such wall plates in numerous upland cottages, suggesting that families experimented with heat-retaining plaster and ceramic to spruce up drab stone walls. Historians still argue whether these discs were standard practice or limited to wealthier hamlets with access to potter's kilns. You lean back, feeling the straw compress under your thighs, and notice how your breath fogs the air between your nose and the wall. That rising humidity also plays its part, as warm, moist breath comes into contact with the cold stone. It cools and releases warmth into the surroundings. Microclimatic exchange that keeps the immediate bench area just a touch cozier. Mainstream accounts mention that some peasants intentionally breathed against the walls during bench sessions, believing it improved circulation and fed the stones with warmth. Scholars still debate whether this breath warming was a conscious practice or a charming myth later attached to passive heating lore. You press your palm against the backboard, feeling the subtle warmth that pulses there, and recall fragments of old advice passed down by elders. Place your bench where the wind bites hardest, so the cold steals all the chill for itself. It sounds like reverse psychology, but the logic is sound. By sacrificing direct bench heat to the north wall, you protect more of the room's interior from the cold's full brunt. It's like sending your nose to the cold front while your torso stays tucked safely in the warmth. A light joke drifts through your thoughts. It's like giving the cold side a comfy seat, so it stops trying to freeze the rest of the room. Yet that peasant wisdom encapsulates a sophisticated understanding of airflow and thermal mass. Families even arranged furniture, stools, chests, and spinning wheels to form windbreaks, funneling drafts away from bench occupants or toward the north wall where they could be neutralized. In some Frisian villages, benches against the north wall featured small lattice screens on either side, simple wooden barriers that blocked cross breezes entering through narrow window slits. These screens created a semi-enclosed alcove where body heat and bench warmth formed a microclimate. Excavations of coastal cottages reveal remnants of these screens, complete with hinge hardware suggesting they could be opened during summer months for ventilation. Historians still argue whether such alcoves were seasonal features or permanent fixtures in well-off peasant homes. You sit forward, tracing a finger along the cool mortar between stones, and imagine the day's sunlight hitting the south-facing roof and walls, storing heat in the stones before drifting into the bench. At night, when those walls cool unevenly, the north wall's heated mass provides a steady, gentle counterpoint to residual hearth warmth. Think of it like sipping lukewarm tea after a piping hot cup. You're never jostled by sudden temperature changes. A fringe detail surfaces in remote alpine chalets. Peasants sometimes built double-wall benches, two parallel benches a few feet apart, with the gap filled by loose stones or gravel. The inner bench faced the hearth. The outer bench faced the north wall. Heat from both sides funneled into the cavity, warming the stone fill, which then radiated heat back into both bench surfaces. Remains of such double bench systems have been found in high-altitude ruins above 1,200 meters, where keeping body heat from escaping was paramount. Scholars still debate whether the double bench concept was an isolated mountain innovation or widespread design briefly popular in medieval Europe. You consider your straw bench's placement again, noting how the north wall's rough texture diffuses cold air pockets, preventing drafts from pooling. In contrast, smooth plaster walls on the south or east sides might reflect cold back into the room. By facing north, the bench exploits the insulation properties of unplastered stone, creating a stable surface for heat exchange. This subtle insight, knowing which surfaces to expose and which to cover, speaks to centuries of peasant trial and error. Mainstream sources reveal that medieval peasants often rotated benches seasonally. In summer, they moved seats toward the eastern windows to catch dawn light and morning warmth. In winter, they reverted to the north wall placement to harness passive heat release. This dynamic furniture arrangement resembles modern ergonomic design, only without the fancy gadgets. Historians still argue whether seasonal bench rotation was universal or varied dramatically between regions. A light aside, you might picture your furniture stuck in one spot, but for peasants, bench mobility was key. They heaved straw benches from wall to wall as seasons changed, as though playing a life-size game of medieval musical chairs, except the prize was a few extra degrees of warmth. That exercise alone likely kept them agile, compensating for less varied diets than today. You lean back against the north wall one last time, closing your eyes to the rhythmic rhythm of hearth embers fading behind you. The bench beneath you, oriented toward the coldest wind, cradles you in a cocoon of passive heat. You feel how every degree toward the wall has been reclaimed and repurposed, stored in stone and straw alike. As the night deepens and the hearth's glow dims to embers, the north wall bench continues to hum with residual warmth, offering you a gentle, steady comfort against the frozen world beyond. That deliberate bench placement facing the chilliest side reveals peasants not as hapless victims of weather, but as keen observers of thermal behavior. They map drafts, track sun paths, and rearrange furniture accordingly, all to keep themselves just warm enough to survive another morning. Now, as you drift toward slumber, you carry with you the wisdom of those who turn cold's harshest edge into a secret ally. You wake to the scent of simmering broth drifting in from the next room, and you realize that medieval peasants understood the power of a hearty stew to warm you from the inside out, especially when enjoyed on your straw bench. Tonight's brew bubbles in a blackened pot over the dying embers, a thick amalgam of barley root vegetables, and salted pork rind that promises digestive heat long after the last spoonful. As you trudge over and settle back onto your bench, you cradle a wooden bowl between your knees, letting its warmth radiate through your mitts and into your chest, readying you for the dual thermal therapy of eating and bench sitting. Mainstream records confirm that peasant diets in the 14th century centered on pottages, one-pot stews made from cereals, legumes, and whatever scraps of meat were affordable. Barley or oats thicken the broth, providing slow-burning calories that digest gradually, generating internal warmth. Historians still argue whether the typical peasant's caloric intake actually exceeded what modern athletes consume. Some argue that continuous manual labor and the cold climate demanded caloric intakes of 3,000 to 4,000 calories per day, while others contend that scarcity often meant rations fell far below such figures. Either way, you're about to experience the metabolic furnace of a medieval supper. You lift a spoonful of thick, lumpy gruel and let it slide onto your tongue. The barley's nutty chew contrasts with the soft yield of boiled turnips, creating a texture that's both substantial and oddly comforting. As each bite travels down your throat, You feel a subtle internal glow, what they called the inner fire, that lingers long after you set the bowl aside. It's the same warmth that allowed peasants to trudge through dawn to dusk labor in woolen cloaks without succumbing to hypothermia. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some villages, families added crushed Scotch bonnet peppers to their pottages, not for flavor, but to induce sweating and boost circulation. You might wince at the notion of hot spices in a winter stew, but archaeological finds in coastal England uncovered peppercorns mixed with dried peas in medieval kitchens, suggesting a taste for capsaicin-fueled toast to health. Scholars still debate whether these peppers arrived via the spice trade primarily as medicinal curiosities or as culinary staples in everyday peasant cooking. You lean back against your straw bench and sip the broth directly from your bowl, feeling its heat spread through your belly. As digestion kicks in, blood rushes to your stomach and extremities, enhancing the bench's surface heat beneath your calves. It's a two-pronged approach. Peat-heated straw warms your skin, while metabolic heat from the stew warms your core. Together, they create a symphony of comfort that no single heat source can match. Between sips, you let your fingers trace the faint herb flakes from the broth, rosemary sprigs for circulation, sage leaves for digestion, and a hint of thyme echoing the aromatic straw from earlier evenings. Remember those dried herb benches? Tonight's stew carries the same fragrance profile, reinforcing the interplay between what's in your pot and what's beneath you. A light joke flutters in your mind. Who knew medieval cuisine was essentially a food bench spa package? In many cottages, the evening meal ritual unfolded directly on or near the straw bench. Families would adjust their seats so that the pot's handle rested within arm's reach, allowing each diner to ladle pottage while keeping legs ensconced in straw warmth. Mainstream chronicles mention bench feasts, informal suppers where neighbors shared one giant stew pot, passing it like a communal bowl of modern campus ramen, though with far fewer neon noodles and instant flavor packets. Historians still argue whether these communal meals were nightly staples or reserved for festivals and market days when ingredients were abundant. You pause to breathe in the smoky steam rising from the stew, noticing how it mingles with peat's lingering odor and your herbal bench's aroma. The combined scents create a rustic perfume that's as grounding as it is appetizing. You tuck a loose straw needle behind your ear, a souvenir of earlier bench sessions, and return your focus to the bowl. The pork rind dissolves into gelatinous softness, coating your tongue in a layer of fatty warmth designed to lubricate your gut against the chill. A quirky nuance emerges. In parts of Eastern Europe, peasants stirred a handful of crushed caraway seeds into their stews, believing the seeds stimulated digestion and circulated heat more effectively. Ethnobotanical studies highlight caraway's carminative properties, but it's clear that peasant cooks prized its warming reputation as much as its flavor. Scholars still debate whether caraway made its way into peasant kitchens before or after its popularity soared among courtly chefs, but either way, you're benefiting from that cross-cultural spice exchange tonight. You spoon another mouthful and feel your shoulders loosen as the metabolic warmth intensifies. Eating on the straw bench wasn't just about taste, it was a strategic choice. Digestive heat peaks roughly an hour after a meal, so timing your supper snugly before bedtime ensured you stayed warm through the frigid early morning hours. Mainstream sources note that villages observed strict mealtime schedules due to communal labor patterns, meaning that bench dinners often unfolded at dusk, perfectly synchronized with the hearth's last strong embers. Between mouthfuls, you glance at the bench frame, recalling the woven straw pouches and draft binders you admired earlier. You imagine your stew-fueled core heat rising to meet the bench's residual warmth, making every layer of linen and straw feel like an orchestrated thermal ensemble. A light aside surfaces. Modern diets obsess over metabolism boosters. Medieval peasants were the original metabolism fanatics, just without the wellness influencers. You finish the last of the stew and place the bowl aside, feeling the residual broth clinging to your throat. You rub your belly as though it were a healing talisman, and you notice how your torso feels toasty enough that you could loosen your tunic without risking a chill. That internal warmth then migrates outward, keeping your back flush against the wooden backrest and your thighs nestled into the straw's insulating core. Before pushing yourself up, you scoop a small handful of dried breadcrumbs from a cloth sack and nudge them under the bench straw. This leftover crumbs trick-tucked into the straw provided gentle char warmth when the next day's hearth lit, priming the bench for warmth renewal. A quirky village hack, but one supported by hearthside find spots at archaeological sites, breadcrumbs embedded in bench corners. Scholars still debate whether this habit was widespread or only used by particularly frugal families mindful of waste. As you stand, you feel a final pang of gratitude for the peasant blueprint of culinary and furniture synergy. No modern gadget could replicate the combined effect of metabolic heat and straw insulation. Medieval peasants engineered their entire environment, from bench placement to dinner recipes, to function as a cohesive thermal system. You stretch your legs, unused to such well-considered warmth strategies in your own life, and pat the bench absent-mindedly, as though saying goodbye to an old friend. You leave the bench for the moment, letting its residual warmth hold out against the hammering wind. But you know you'll return before dawn, drawn by the promise of both hearth-charged straw and another steaming bowl. Because in this rustic synergy of diet and design, peasants discovered that the best way to conquer winter's chill was to eat warmly, sit warmly, and let your entire body become a living, breathing radiator. You return to your straw bench just as the hearth's last embers glow faintly, and you notice the carved runes etched into the bench's side, tiny symbols that look more like doodles than serious craftsmanship. Yet in many medieval hamlets, benches were believed to harbor their own household spirits, bennerkin or bench guardians, whose favor could mean the difference between a night of cozy warmth and a night spent shivering. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions reflected genuine superstition or were simply decorative flourishes inspired by nearby church carvings, but village folklore abounds with stories of bench guardians warding off cold and misfortune. A mainstream fact, throughout Europe, peasant homes often featured apotropaic symbols, Marian marks, Solomon's knots, and occasionally runic inscriptions carved onto beams, doorways, and furniture to protect inhabitants from evil influences. These protective signs were as much a part of domestic life as the hearth itself, and benches were no exception. Scholars still debate whether these marks stemmed from ecclesiastical edicts endorsing folk piety or from older pagan traditions quietly integrated into Christian practice. You settle onto the bench and feel a faint pulse of warmth beneath your legs, almost as if something unseen is pushing heat up through the straw. According to local lore, the bennerkin dwells in the straw core, stoking tiny fires in hidden cavities to keep toes from freezing. Some elders claimed you could coax the spirit by offering a few drops of ale, dribbled into the straw, or by whispering a simple invocation, benchkin, breathe warm through timber and grain. Whether this ever actually worked or was simply an excuse to sneak ale into bedtime routines is unclear, but archaeological surveys of bench interiors occasionally reveal traces of vinegar and ale, unlikely accidental spills hinting at ritual use. Historians still argue whether these offerings were widespread peasant practice or isolated superstitions kept alive by storytellers. A quirky tidbit: in remote parts of the Scottish Highlands, families placed a small carved wooden face, often resembling an old man's grin, inside the bench frame, believing it embodied the bennerkin itself. The face, called the toasty fizz, was said to come alive during the coldest nights, glowing faintly and exhaling warmth like a miniature dragon. Tales recorded in 16th century oral collections describe children daring one another to peek inside the bench after midnight to see if the fizz winked. Scholars still debate whether the toasty fizz was a genuine folk belief or a playful invention of traveling minstrels. As you shift your weight, you feel the runes rub against your britches, and you can't help but test the legend. You lean forward and pour a few drops of your last ale ration onto the straw, whispering the ancient invitation. Immediately, a subtle heat buzz trickles up your legs, though it could just be the peat ember's radiance finally peaking. You close your eyes and imagine a tiny straw-bound spirit fanning embers within the bench's heart, content with its midnight tribute. Beyond the ale-giving, villages abounded with other heat-related superstitions. In parts of Eastern Europe, healers recommended placing a sprig of rowan wood under the bench plank to repel cold demons. Rowan berries, with their bright red clusters, symbolize life and warmth, and wood fragments found in bench alcoves suggest this practice endured for generations. Historians still argue whether rowan's protective power was a Christian appropriation of older pagan rites, or simply a case of ornamental wood turned practical draft excluder. You recall a fringe anecdote about a bench in a remote French hamlet where locals believed the bench guardian demanded laughter to power its warmth. According to legend, you had to tell a joke, any joke, into the bench's ear to ensure the spirit kept stoking its embers. One pranking miller reportedly howled bawdy limericks into his bench, keeping his toes absurdly warm and his neighbors perpetually frustrated at the ruckus. Scholars still debate whether such laughter-based rituals were genuine community practices or humorous additions by later chroniclers seeking to color rural life. A mainstream observation, medieval peasant belief systems often blended practical health advice with supernatural prophylactics. Jars of garlic hung above doorways for warding illness, and benches too carried their own apotropaic elements. Bedtime lore fit neatly into this worldview, merging the tangible comfort of a straw bench with the intangible assurance of protective spirits. Historians still argue whether church authorities tacitly tolerated these hybrid superstitions or attempted to stamp them out as facets of heathen practice. Settling deeper into the straw, you feel a curious comfort in these trickling beliefs, whether real or imagined. The idea of a Bedtime offers psychological warmth. You imagine generations of peasants whispering the same ritual, building communal confidence that the bench would indeed keep them safe from frost. In a world where the next gust could slip through the roof and steal their heat, the assurance of unseen guardians carried real weight. This blend of pragmatic design and spiritual ritual demonstrates the holistic survival strategies of the medieval peasantry. Benches functioned as seats, heaters, and even altars. A simple wooden form stuffed with straw became a focal point for both physical warmth and spiritual safeguarding, a testament to how closely material and immaterial worlds intertwined in daily life. A light joke surfaces. Who knew your bench needed a ghostly roommate to stay toasty? You drift your fingertips across the carved symbols, Solomon's knot looping into a Marian chevron, wondering which deity or demon you just invoked. Yet as the runes warm beneath your touch, you concede that whether it's peat heat, straw insulation, or Bedtime magic, the outcome is the same. Your toes are snug. And in that cottage, snugness was the ultimate victory over winter's bite. Before sleep takes you, you offer one final gift, a whispered goodnight to the bench guardian, expressing gratitude for the warmth it bestows. You imagine the spirit nodding in agreement before tucking you into gentle oblivion. Whether Bedtime exists or not, the ritual cements your bond to centuries of villagers who did the same, each trusting in a bit of superstition to bolster their resolve against the cold. And so you lie back, toes curled into the straw's heart, comforted by the thought that you're watched over by hearth, by stone walls, and by that humble bench spirit. Frost may howl outside, but inside, faith and design merge into one gentle, warming embrace. You take one last breath, lulled by the whisper of runes and the legacy of Bedtime lore, and drift toward sleep with a smile on your face. You wake with a faint creak of floorboards as someone, rummages for hammocks in the corner, and you can't help but wonder, why wrestle with a fussy bed when you have a perfectly serviceable, straw-filled bench ready to cradle you in warmth? Medieval households often featured both benches and simple bed chambers, raised wooden frames draped in cloth, but peasants fiercely debated which offered superior comfort. Historians still argue whether benches truly outperformed rudimentary beds in warmth, or whether a well-stocked bedchamber with furs and feather tickings trumped any bench's cozy charm. Mainstream chronicles note that peasant beds, when available, were little more than wooden platforms laden with hay or straw mattresses called pallets, sometimes topped with wool or goose feathers for those who could afford them. In contrast, benches filled with fresh straw were swapped out regularly to remove damp and pests, ensuring nightly warmth. Yet bed pallets had the advantage of enclosing you in a chamber draped with heavy wool curtains, perfect for trapping body heat and keeping drafts at bay. Scholars still debate whether the cost and labor of washing and replacing bed straw outweighed bench maintenance, or if benches offered a lower effort solution favored by most villagers. You imagine crouching into a curtained bedchamber, the velvet-like hush of drapes muffling wind's howl, versus sliding onto a bench that greets you with the faint aroma of hay. The choice depended on geography and resources. In upland Yorkshire, where cottages were tiny and spaced tight, benches doubled as daytime seating and nighttime beds, one piece of furniture doing double duty. Conversely, in more prosperous low-country farms, families carved out separate sleeping chambers, valuing privacy and investing precious feathers into bed ticks. Historians still argue whether multifunctional benches were born of necessity or a cultural preference for communal sleeping arrangements. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants attached simple wooden headboards to their benches, boards high enough to prop against a wall. Draped with spare linen to create a makeshift canopy, it's like a minimalist bed frame that folds up for dinner. Archaeological evidence from a Devonshire dig revealed bench frames with mortised holes, suggesting removable headboards, hinting at flexible furniture that morphed from bench by day to bed by night. Scholars still debate whether these convertible benches were widespread or limited to villages influenced by monastic dormitory designs. You lean back against your bench's carved backboard and run a hand over the wooden surface, considering the practicalities. Beds required fresh straw once a year at minimum, and pallets often harbored fleas and lice until villagers burned entire mattress layers to eradicate pests. By contrast, a bench's straw core could be refreshed monthly, and benches sat in open rooms where smoke from the hearth helped deter bugs. Mainstream records from a 15th century English manor instruct servants to tumble out straw benches at least monthly, emphasizing hygiene. Yet bedchambers, shrouded by heavy drapes, accumulated grime and vermin out of sight. Historians still argue whether bench bedding was the more sanitary choice or simply more conspicuous in its upkeep. Your thoughts drift to nightly routines. Tucking curtains around a bedchamber required having enough spare cloth and time luxuries most peasants lacked after field work. A bench demanded little more than a quick straw swap and a flick of the broom to clear debris. It's no wonder some villages held bench renewal festivals each autumn, where families gathered fresh straw, singing harvest songs as they refilled their benches. Those communal events reinforced the bench's central role in peasant life. A light joke drifts up. Why wrestle with curtains at midnight when you can belt straw in 5 minutes flat? Between bench rituals and bed upkeep, cost emerged as a key factor. Feathers weren't cheap. A goose-down pillow could cost several days' wages. Straw, however, came free after harvest. Some resourceful households mixed straw and down and pallet straw for bulk. Down for insulation, but feather-stripped straw sometimes got tangled in blankets, provoking itchy nights. Scholars still debate whether mixed pallet bedding represented a middle-class invention or a compromise by poorer families striving for a hint of luxury. In certain regions of Alsace, Peasants built bench beds, benches with hinged lids that lifted to reveal straw mattresses inside, complete with canvas covers. It's basically an early storage bed, except the stored item is the bed itself. Archaeological digs uncovered these bench beds tucked against stone walls, their lids supported by wooden pegs. Historians still argue whether bench beds originated as space-saving solutions in narrow farmhouses or as status symbols among better-off peasants eager to display carpentry skill. You press your palm against the bench's seat and feel residual heat pressing back. It's a tactile vote in the bench's favor. No feathery shroud could replicate that prickly warmth. Yet you remember your grandmother's feather tick. The soft give of down was glorious after a long day's labor. The debate raged in hearthside conversations. Give me a bench any night, some declared. Others retorted, only a curtained bedchamber beats the drafty boards. Scholars still debate whether these conversations represented genuine preference or a narrative crafted by later folklorists nostalgic for communal sleeping. A fringe tale surfaces in parts of Bavaria. Villagers swapped benches cooperatively. Each family hosted the communal bed for 1 week, while others brought their bench cushions. This rotating rest house concept pooled resources and spread warmth equity. An excavation at a hamlet site revealed dozens of leather-bound bench cushions stored beneath a communal loft, suggesting organized bench exchanges. Historians still argue whether such bench pooling was a widespread cooperative model or an isolated communal experiment. You close your eyes briefly, picturing the curtained bedchamber with its muffled hush and the open bench station with its crackling hearth air. Both offered unique advantages. Beds provided privacy and security. Benches offered simplicity and immediacy. It all boiled down to personal taste, local tradition, and available resources. Ultimately, medieval peasants didn't choose blindly. They weighed cost, hygiene, space, and warmth, and often opted for bench rhythms over bed rituals. As you settle back on your bench, you feel a soft contentment in its straw embrace. It may lack the plush luxury of feathers and curtains, but it hums with honest, unpretentious warmth. The bench debate continues in dusty archives and scholarly journals. Yet in your cottage tonight, the winner is clear. The straw bench holds you, supports you, and warms you better than any curtained pallet ever could. You let the debate fade into gentle oblivion as you drift toward sleep, secure in your choice. You stir to the sound of wood crackling and realize your blanket slipped off again, easily solved by reaching for the thick linen one folded at the bench's foot. But you pause, eyes barely open, and think, who did the laundry? Because that blanket, despite its coarseness, smells not terrible. In fact, for something used nightly through a damp winter, it's remarkably fresh. Welcome to the hidden labor of medieval hygiene, where clean meant not covered in visible mud, and soap was often lye, ash, or occasionally mashed up herbs mixed with animal fat. You picture your medieval counterpart squatting by a frigid stream, knuckles red, scrubbing cloth against wooden paddles. Laundering wasn't a daily affair, weekly at best, seasonal more likely. In most peasant households, 1 good wash in winter could mean boiling everything linen-based in an enormous iron cauldron, laced with wood ash or soapwort, a foaming plant still argued over by botanists and historians alike. Did everyone use it? Or was it a regional quirk from hedgerows in Western England? No one agrees. And then, of course, you had trying to consider. Clotheslines? Not really. Most items were draped over hedges, fences, or hung from smoky rafters where both heat and smoke worked their magic. The result? A shirt that smelled faintly of campfire and possibly bacon. Cozy, if you think about it. It's like wearing a breakfast memory. A mainstream fact. The average medieval peasant owned just 1 or 2 changes of clothing. Laundering was less about keeping your outfit pristine and more about reducing lice, fleas, and general grime buildup. You often wore the same garments every day, and when washing happened, it was a project. In some areas, entire communities scheduled collective wash days, turning streams into impromptu, chatter-filled laundromats. If that sounds idyllic, remember, your hands are freezing, the wind cuts through your kirtle, and a cow just wandered off with your drying shift. Still, cleanliness wasn't taken lightly. Contrary to modern stereotypes, medieval people cared about smell. Your straw bench might be humble, but it was likely dusted with herbs like lavender, pennyroyal, or even crushed juniper leaves, all mild insect repellents with the bonus of masking the more pungent aromas of a one-room home. Some French practices even involved stuffing old socks with sage and hanging them by the fire to sweeten the air. Historians still debate whether that was actual deodorizing or more like early medieval aromatherapy. Now imagine yourself warming your feet by the hearth, the last embers glowing soft red. You glance at your tunic patched, worn, but clean enough, and remember how much work it took. Scrubbing clothing also shortened its lifespan. Every harsh rinse, every squeeze and wring of linen risked tearing the fabric. So peasants became experts at spot cleaning, using damp cloths and ash paste to blot stains. Only when absolutely necessary did a garment get the full boiling treatment. Historians still argue whether this efficiency came from necessity or early environmental genius. Even water itself wasn't always easy to access. If you lived far from a clean stream or well, your household had to ration the precious resource. A family might reuse water for multiple loads of laundry, first for linens, then rough outerwear, then finally for the dogs or to scrub the floor. Yes, the same bucket. Frightening, maybe. Efficient, incredibly. Your linen shirt might complain, but it got clean eventually. For some, however, winter changed the rules. Frozen rivers meant water had to be fetched and thawed over fire, turning laundry into a multi-day commitment. One quirky workaround involved packing garments in snow and pounding them with wooden mallets to freeze clean. Them kind of like shaking out a rug with extra steps. Scholars still debate whether this process truly cleaned or was just wishful thumping. As you lie back on your straw bench, you notice how scratchy the woolen blanket feels until you recall it might have been brushed clean by hand, not washed. Large woven items like cloaks and coverlets were rarely laundered. Instead, they were beaten, brushed, and aired out. Some peasants even believed in moon washing, leaving linens out under a full moon to let the night air purify them. Historians still argue whether this practice had practical roots in dew bleaching or leaned more into folklore than function. But for all the hardship, there was pride in that annual laundry reset. Peasants often celebrated the first wash after winter with herb bundles tied to clothes poles or a fresh scatter of rushes across the floor renewal in a house that hadn't seen fresh air in months. Some regions of France even had sayings, "A clean shirt sings twice," meaning a fresh tunic lifted the spirit. You chuckle at the thought, who knew a laundry day could feel like a party? Then there's the silent hygiene hero of the bench. It's straw. Remember how straw was changed regularly? Well, that kept things smelling better than you'd expect. In wealthier homes, dried rose petals or crushed bay leaves were mixed into the bench fill. Not for luxury, purely practical. Certain herbs repelled vermin. Others reduced mustiness. But of course, you also like the smell. If your bedding feels a little like a perfumed barn, that's kind of the point. Your toes curl against the bench's warmth. No mattress ticking here, no feather bed but clean linen, swap straw, and the faint whiff of rosemary tucked beneath your blanket. You settle in, reminded that even in centuries past, people worked hard to feel fresh, even if clean came with caveats. You may have only washed your tunic 4 times a year, but you knew how to pick good-smelling straw. And really, that's what tonight's all about. The tiny rituals, the care beneath the grime, the hands red from laundry kind of effort that made medieval homes feel habitable, not pristine, not sterile, but lived in and loved. You wake to the dull thud of cartwheels on cobblestones, and you realize that the world outside this humble cottage is changing fast new fashions. New technologies and new ideas are conspiring to edge the straw bench out of everyday life. As you slide onto your bench one last time, you notice the exposed edges of straw looking worn and pale, like an old friend tired from too many winters. Historians still argue whether fashion trends or emerging heating technologies precipitated the decline, but the straw bench's reign as the primary heat seat was drawing to a close. A mainstream fact, by the late 16th century, cast iron stoves and tiled stoves imported from the Low Countries and Central Europe began appearing in wealthier peasant homes and rural manors alike. Unlike open hearths, these stoves radiated consistent, controllable heat, and often featured built-in sitting ledges or integrated bench attachments. Users no longer needed to wrestle with loose straw or stagger bench rotations by season. A single metal surface kept the chill at bay. Scholars still debate whether peasants adopted stoves out of genuine enthusiasm or grudging necessity, given the high cost and maintenance they entailed. You run a hand over the cool wooden frame, remembering the bench's clever quirks, draft binders, herbal pouches, and bench guards that once defended you against bitter winds. Now, merchants hawk pottery foot stoves filled with coals, tiny ceramic heaters you could carry from room to room. You imagine medieval parents swapping straw poultices for these porcelain novelties, more portable, yes, but lacking the bench's multi-sensory comfort of scratchy warmth and herbal steam. A light joke springs to mind. Pretty soon, villagers will be schlepping foot stoves like portable espresso machines. Between rustic benches and sleek stoves, fashion played its part too. Mainstream sources note that in the 17th century, brocaded textiles and floor-to-ceiling tapestries became status symbols, insulating walls without straw. Wealthier peasants and emerging middle classes invested in woven wool hangings, elevating home decor above simple straw benches. Historians still argue whether tapestry adoption was driven by aesthetic aspiration or by a practical urge to trap heat, but either way, the straw bench became associated with backwardness rather than ingenuity. You glance at your linen wrap, recalling how its fibers once muffled prickly straw. By this era, printed cotton fabrics imported from India offered softer, patterned covers for chairs and daybeds. The idea of sitting directly on straw lost its appeal when you could have a cushioned seat and paisley print. Fringe tidbits tell of noble fashion-driven bands. Some manor lords discreetly forbade their tenants from using straw benches during market festivals, deeming them unseemly compared to elegant seating. Archaeological records from wealthy estates reveal benches dismantled and straw repurposed as animal bedding or insulation under floorboards. Scholars still debate whether these bans were top-down decrees or grassroots shifts in taste. You lean forward, picturing a time when bench artisans struggled to sell their services. Carpentry guilds began certifying bench makers alongside chair makers, marking straw benches as artisan-hewn rather than peasant tack. Yet even guild-backed benches lacked the prestige of polished chairs. Gentle sarcasm teases your mind. Congratulations, you're now the proud owner of a craft straw bench, only slightly less embarrassing than that plastic recliner. Practical though it was, the straw bench now carried cultural baggage. Heat technologies advanced further. Chimney installations funneled smoke outside, allowing cottages to be fully sealed. Infelicitous drafts vanished, and with them, the bench's original raison d'etre. Mainstream engineering texts from the 18th century described chimney and flue designs that enabled efficient stoves without smoke leaking through thatch. Scholars still argue whether the proliferation of chimneys was limited by cost or by conservative resistance to change, but once chimneys became commonplace, the straw bench's strategic placement under drafty eaves lost urgency. You feel pangs of nostalgia for earlier communal bench rituals, shared benches, oat gruel, and whispered Bennerkin invocations. Village gatherings adapted too. Neighbors now huddled around hearth irons or practiced new traditions, around tea kettles and ceramic samovars. One light joke flits through your thoughts. Next thing you know, they'll gather for a boring parlor tableau for tea time instead of Bennerkin bedtime storytelling. The transition feels bittersweet. Innovation is wonderful until it displaces the warm embrace of centuries-old customs. Regional customs faded unevenly. In remote mountain hamlets where stoves and chintz were scarce, straw benches persisted well into the 18th century. Alpine folk tales even tell of stubborn grandmothers hiding bench cushions in lofts, fearing the new metal stoves would steal the bench spirit. Fringe archaeological finds include stoves built around benches, rather than benches built around stoves, evidence that some communities merged old and new rather than abandoning the bench entirely. Historians still debate how long these hybrid setups endured before one approach definitively won. You lean back and compare the straw's faded aroma with your memory of lavender and rosemary pouches. Modern homes now favored scented candles and sachets in closets, relegating herbal bench infusions to quaint museum exhibits. The very idea of weaving herbs into seating strikes urbanites as eccentric artisanal design, far removed from the stove and sofa standard. Yet you know that nothing replicates the gentle herbal steam that once rose from your bench, softening every sigh. By mid-18th century, broader socio-economic shifts accelerated the bench's obsolescence. Enclosures and land reforms uprooted many rural families, pushing them into burgeoning towns and factories. Urban housing offered little room for sprawling benches. Space-saving chairs and folding stools replaced them. Mainstream census data from early industrial towns show bench-making professions dwindling as chair makers and upholsterers thrived. Scholars still argue whether this decline stemmed from urban overcrowding or from rising consumer tastes, likely a blend of both. You imagine the bench in a new context, dragged into a damp tenement. Straw damp from crowded living, the warmth a poor substitute for communal ovens and factory-generated heat. No Bennerkin could save toes in a cramped, unheated garret. In that context, the straw bench's practicality collapsed under modern pressures. A light aside drifts through your mind. Straw benches, great for villages, terrible for coal mining districts. Yet, while everyday use dwindled, nostalgia sparked a renaissance among antiquarians and romantic poets. Mainstream cultural critics of the early 19th century began extolling the quaint simplicity of peasant benches, sowing the seeds for folk revivals and farmhouse decor centuries later. Scholars still debate whether this revivalist interest preserved bench traditions or merely fetishized them as rural kitsch. Either way, the straw bench found new life, no longer a necessity, but a decorative relic. As you rest your hand on the frayed straw, you sense how the bench embodies resilience and adaptation. Its decline wasn't a sudden collapse, but a gradual fading as societies embraced new comforts. The straw bench didn't vanish. It evolved transformed into museum pieces, garden seats with decorative pillows, and Instagram-ready vintage props. A gentle joke curls your lips. Look, Ma, I recreated medieval bench warmth. Just add rustic sourdough for that complete aesthetic. You close your eyes, picturing the last peasant who relied on bench warmth, leaning into the hearth's reflection, herbal straw infusions still clinging faintly to the air. Their children might laugh at the archaic seat, but to their toes, the straw bench remained a trusted companion. In its obsolescence lies a lesson. True ingenuity adapts or awaits rediscovery. The straw bench may have ceded center stage to stoves and tapestries, but its legacy endures in the warmth of simple solutions. Tonight, you honor that legacy one final time. You lean back, toes nestled in straw, and trace the carved runes, Bennerkin's old mark guardian smiling at the spirit's enduring warmth. The world outside may bustle with progress, but here, in this moment, The straw bench reminds you that necessity births beauty. As the last ember glows behind you, you drift towards sleep with gratitude for every invested stalk and carved notch that once warmed you so well. You settle onto your straw bench one final time, tracing the familiar ridges of worn wood and compressing the soft straw beneath your legs. And you realize that the legacy of these humble seats extends far beyond the chill of any single winter night. Across centuries and continents, communities have rediscovered and repurposed straw benches, from open-air folk festivals in Eastern Europe to living history museums in New England, celebrating their blend of rustic charm and functional warmth. Historians still argue whether these modern revivals honor authentic peasant traditions or simply romanticize a bygone era, but workshops on benchmaking and straw stuffing techniques now draw enthusiasts eager to experience the original DIY radiator. Mainstream heritage organizations confirm that straw benches feature prominently in reconstructed medieval villages, where interpreters demonstrate how straw densities and bench placements affected thermal comfort. Visitors often gasp when they slide onto a freshly stuffed bench and feel its surprisingly comforting warmth, especially when positioned beneath a replica thatched roof. These living history sites extol the bench's role in daily medieval life, underlining that peasants invented these solutions long before central heating or electric blankets. Yet scholars still debate whether modern reenactors accurately replicate historical straw compositions. Some argue that today's straw, grown under different agricultural conditions, offers different insulating properties than pre-industrial revolution grain stalks. You lean forward, noticing how the straw's aroma now carries faint traces of linseed oil used to treat the bench frame, a nod to more recent preservation methods. In certain heritage circles, conservators treat museum benches with natural oils to prevent wood rot, a practice some purists decry as anachronistic. Fringe purveyors of authentic experience insist on untreated benches, even if they creak ominously under each sitter. Historians still argue whether such treatments fundamentally alter the bench's sensory profile or merely extend its lifespan for generations to come. Beyond museums, interior designers have incorporated straw benches into modern farmhouse decor, pairing them with shearling throws and Edison bulb sconces to evoke pastoral tranquility. Lifestyle blogs praise the bench's ability to add vintage patina and subtle insulation to sunrooms and entryways. Some design influencers even host bench warming parties, where guests exchange winter wellness tips while perched on straw cushions. A light joke flits through your mind. If only medieval peasants had Instagram hashtag bench goals would have trended by Christmas. In rural communities of Galicia and Brittany, elders still maintain ancestral benches, rotating straw every autumn and passing tools down through families. Mainstream anthropological surveys note that these practices preserve intangible cultural heritage, binding generations through the ritual of bench renewal. Yet researchers still debate whether these rituals are surviving fragments of medieval rhythms or reinventions influenced by 19th century Romantic nationalist movements. Either way, the benches serve as living links between past and present, each fresh straw layer carrying the memory of harvest festivals and communal gatherings. You flex your feet and recall that some modern benchmakers are experimenting with hybrid fillings mixing. Traditional cereal straw with recycled wool fibers or coconut coir to boost insulation and fire resistance. Quirky innovator collectives tout these eco-bench models as the future of sustainable seating, championing zero-waste design. Archaeological societies still argue whether such hybrids stray too far from historical authenticity or represent the natural evolution of bench technology in response to contemporary needs. In literature and art, the straw bench appears as a potent symbol of home and hearth. Poets evoke it as a cradle for humble epiphanies, while painters capture candlelight dancing across its planks and straw tufts. Mainstream catalogs of medieval iconography Identify at least a dozen illuminated manuscripts depicting peasants seated on benches, their straw-filled forms hinted at with simple line work. Scholars still debate whether these depictions reflect common domestic furniture or idealized motifs borrowed from monastic scriptoria. You glance at the carved runes along the bench's side, worn now but still legible, and think of Bennerkin lore. Today's benchkeepers sometimes inscribe protective symbols anew, chalking runes into the straw or painting sigils on the wood, reviving ancient apotropaic customs for spiritual comfort as much as for heat. Fringe occult practitioners even conduct bench blessings under full moons, invoking warmth and communal goodwill. Historians still argue whether these practices echo genuine medieval beliefs or modern reinterpretations, blending neo-paganism with heritage tourism. In homes without active hearths, bench-warming evenings have morphed into social events. Neighbors gather around electric space heaters, but choose to sit on straw benches rather than sofas, seeking tactile connection to ancestral ingenuity. Workshops on bench etiquette teach guests how to test straw density, locate draft channels, and adjust seating position skills, not unlike advanced ergonomics courses, only far more fragrant. Yet for all these modern permutations, the bench's essential purpose remains the same: to cradle weary legs, to harness body and hearth heat, and to foster community around a simple seat. You close your eyes and feel the gentle swirl of warmth emboldening your toes, as those centuries of bench sitters have pooled their collective heat here, radiating through every stalk of straw. As the final ember of your peat hearth glows behind you, you recognize that the straw bench's enduring legacy lies not only in its physical form, but in the spirit. It embodies a testament to human creativity, resilience, and the desire for small comforts in a cold world. Whether as museum exhibit, interior accent, or sacred ritual object, the straw bench continues to warm bodies and hearts, whispering that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most enduring. Word count 1051. Slowly, the cottage's timber walls inhale the last echoes of your presence, and in this soft hush your thoughts unfurl like tendrils of smoke drifting toward a silent sky. The straw beneath you gives a final faint sigh as it settles, each stalk whispering memories of harvest fields and hearth fires. Your breath blends with the timeless aromas of hay, resinous oils, and lingering peat smoke, crafting a lullaby woven from the textures and scents of centuries. In this moment, there is no rush, only the gentle cadence of your pulse, synchronizing with the bench's subtle warmth. You feel the world outside slip further away, its sharp corners softened by distance, and the glow of embers now dwindling into shadow. Each inhale brings comfort, each exhale releases the last stirrings of the day. There are no obligations, no whispered worries, only the simple promise that warmth remains, cradling you in its ancient embrace. The bench beneath you becomes more than wood and straw. It transforms into a vessel of solace, bridging past and present, carrying every story of ingenuity and care into the quiet depths of night. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift down hallways of memory and imagination, guided by the straw's gentle hum and the hearth's fading glow. Know that you are held not only by fabric and fiber, but by the collective warmth of countless lives who have sat right where you sit now, seeking refuge from the cold. Trust that this warmth belongs to you as well, now and always. Now, surrender to slumber. Let the bench's soft pulse and the whispering stakes of straw lull you into dreams woven from golden fields and embered cottages. Rest easy, carried on a tide of warmth that cannot be extinguished. Sweet dreams, dear listener.